Hello and welcome to Africa Update, reaching you from our studios in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And this week on the program, we're taking a look at an upcoming event taking place towards the end of this year. That's between the November 22nd to 25th. Do stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa Update. I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. And this week on the program, we're taking a look at the event, one of the big events of the year that, affects most of the countries, the G20 Summit. And you know that Africa has, South Africa has a seat on the G20 Summit, representing the African continent. And currently, South Africa is the one leading the G20 for this time. Their tenure will be ending on the 30th of November 2025. They started running 1st of December 2024. Now, there's been some conversations and some talks around it. And there's one that's out there. It's from President of the United States, Donald Trump, boycotting the G20 summit and saying that South Africa has no right to be a member. Let's take a look.
For generations, Miami has been a haven for those fleeing communist tyranny in South Africa. I mean, if you take a look at what's going on in parts of South Africa, look at South Africa, what's going on. Look at South America, what's going on. I'm not we have a G20 meeting in South Africa. South Africa shouldn't even be in the Gs anymore because what's happened there is bad. I'm not going. I told them I'm not going. I'm not going to represent our country there. It shouldn't be there.
Okay, that's it. Trump again. Like I always call the Trump effect, the Trump tornado. He has his ways of doing things. Now, joining me in the studio to further have this conversation is Professor Mukhtar Imam, an international relations and diplomacy expert. Professor, our friend is at it again. Our very good friend. What do you make of that statement?
You see. Leaders have to, what makes you a statesman, what makes you a leader, what makes you an exception is your ability to guard utterances, your ability to gauge impulses, your ability to understand that whatever rhetoric, whatever statements you put out there would have ripple effect. Because the reason why you have ascended to that position of authority, whether ascribed or attained status, is because you have a followership. And so there's a need for leaders to understand that statements that come from them will have some kind of effect on the people. And that could actually make or mar any society. Trump's statement is again coming at a time where the world needs to heal. But he's failing to realize that his utterances mean a lot, particularly and especially considering the fact that this is a man who's at the helms of affair of in the most powerful country in the world.
I'm going to ask supposedly.
Right. Well,
it feels like
that's a subject of argument.
Well, yeah, because it feels like some.
China obviously is the largest economy in the world. The United States will always fall behind. However, when you look at the dynamics of global politics today, the reality is militarily, economically, the United States still stands somewhere there, largely because of the influence of the petrodollar. Well, the petrodollar is still something that has a significant effect as far as global trade is concerned.
Yes.
And until and unless that changes, China's posture will always be, what it is right now. Symbolic.
Which is what, of course, China is working towards with the BRICS.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the alternative, making BRICS an alternative. So to your question, I think that statement was reckless. It was uncalled for. It was unnecessary. The way, words are not in themselves meaningful, but the context in which they are used is what matters. As a leader, these are not words that come out of the mouth of a leader. These are words that come out of the mouth of, forgive my French, a pimp or a hustler or a gangster. I will go into the country guns blazing. You don't hear leaders say
we're not going to
like
touch that.
However, I'm just trying to cite examples.
Because, I personally had that particular statement struck a chord with me because I had a problem with that word guns ablazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is the word that the words, like I said, that will not come out of the mouth of a leader. And here he is again at it, sounding very narcissistic and supremacist. And what are the other terminologies that you could add to this? It's very racist. It doesn't symbolizes the posture of a leader who intends to be the world policeman or world economic policeman.
But that's the thing about it. So you see, the conversation is not about Trump, and I think we're dwelling too much on it, but he is not about policing the world's economy. He's about making America great again.
No, he's not. That is the irony. You see, what Trump is doing is, a lot of people have had this talk around, Trump is ultra-nationalistic and saying America first. And so, essentially, the message that is taken from that is that Trump is saying, go and develop your own, it is America first. No, that's not what is happening here. Now, let me paint the scenario to you very quickly. I know we're running into time. You see, the United States, or rather, global powers, essentially connived at some point and established what we have today as the international rule-based system. Okay. Now, what that order has done is that after the Second World War, it essentially took the entire economy of the world and put it in the hands of the United States. Right? Because Great Britain was the power, which was, of course, you know about Britannica and all that. Now, after the Second World War, the United Kingdom lost all of its posture, its position, and everything. Because it was the resources of the United States that was used to build the economies of countries that were devastated by war. The petrodollar became the instrument of exchange as far as international trade is concerned. And essentially, SWIFT was created, which is essentially one of the payment systems, or about the only payment system in the world today that is agreed upon by the United States, because whatever the US doesn't agree upon, it doesn't fly. Now, Trump tells you that go and develop your own. Nigeria and other countries decided to attend the BRICS Summit, not to be members, just to attend the BRICS Summit. And a day after, sanction was slammed on us, 20% increased tariff. Yes. So essentially, this is a scenario now I'm trying to paint to you. A man divorces his wife and tells her you cannot get married to anybody else except that person whom I choose for you to marry. What exactly have you done? So this man is not saying, if you're trying to tell us, go your separate ways, do your thing, then emancipate people economically. But he hasn't done that. Leaders before him understood that for you to have this international rule-based system which they have created, you must incentivize it. And what did they do? They decided to create USAID. They decided to create FCDO, right? And say, okay, go out there, help people, support their economy. They decided to say, okay, we can give you loans via the IMF and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, what we call the World Bank today, so that we can use these instruments to continue to hold these economies, you know, to ransom, while subtly acting as though we're trying to create multilateralism. But essentially, what they understood was that the world needs to move on. Trump is not understanding that, or fails to understand that. I don't know if it's his level of comprehension, you know, but whatever the case is.
Okay. Hopefully, I want to believe that America will send a representative, seeing as they're supposed to take over power from South Africa for the next 1 year to be the president of the G20 Summit. So hopefully they will send a representative. We've dwelt a lot on Trump, which is not the focus of our conversation. But let's look at the G20 Summit. What's it about? South Africa is the president for this year. And of course, as I said earlier, it's scheduled to hold on the 22nd, actually, to the 23rd of November. That's 2 Saturdays away in Johannesburg, South Africa. This is the first time that the G20 Summit will be held in an African soil since the creation of that thing. Now, there's so many things that we're expecting. One of the major things that Africa is going to in that G20 Summit is debt restructuring. Now, 2 questions for you. One, what does this portend for us hosting the G20 Summit? I just feel like we're just hosting a thing, but maybe there might be something beyond just hosting that could portend for the African continent. And also, before we get in, when you're done with that question, I could now list out to you some of the things Africa is postulating for themselves at the summit.
Yeah, well, it's symbolic. It's symbolic given the fact that Africa has always been seen as being at the receiving end of every conversation. Westphalia Treaty, we were not there. The Versailles Treaty, we were not there. The Vienna Convention, we were not there. The United Nations, we were not there. These things were done on our behalf, and resolutions were made, and we were forced to swallow the pill, line, hook, and sinker. So I think it's quite symbolic that Africa is coming of age and, you know, being around the table where the conversation is had. However, our posture is. Posturing is something that's entirely, different, or could be entirely detached from the conversation we're having. Now, secondly, it gives you room for leverage. Because these people are coming to your home, it essentially gives you the opportunity to maneuver where we're able to do so. You can have conversations with people, there's a psychology to it. You can have conversations with people on their turf, and the bargain is essentially going to be lopsided. So we're hoping that now that the reverse is the case, our people will be able to, own the conversation and make some certain demands that will be favorable to the African continent. However, given the precedents and the history of how our leaders have acted, around the table whenever these international conversations are had, often at times we fall short. Often at times the bargain doesn't really, favor us. So we hope that things will be done differently in South Africa.
You said we people, but really South Africa is the one that has that seat on the table. So the question is, do we expect South Africa to push the agenda, the African 54-country agenda, or the South African country agenda?
The reality is that, as has been argued by the realists, Hans Morgenthau and Kenneth Walt and other realists who have come after them, every country is selfish, and so therefore every country's foreign policy, domestic policy, revolves around its national interest and national security first before anybody else or any other country. Therefore, it will not be unlikely to see that South Africa will project its demands and its request first before going to the wider conversation of talking about the 50-plus country. But the reality is South Africa has always shown some reservation as far as its position on Pan-Africanism and so on and so forth is concerned. So that could give pundits some misconception or even apprehension as to the fact of whether South Africa is going to be speaking for the 50-plus country across the African continent. However, we want to stay hopeful and believe that we will come to the organization as one and speak with a common front, because that's what we expect to do. Okay,
just for clarity's sake, right. Is it the AU that is a member of the G20, or is it South Africa that is a member of the G20, and then how does that work?
Well, it's this is South Africa's seat. This is South Africa's thing. It is essentially for the country South Africa, not even for the Southern African countries. This is for South Africa. However, you see, drafting countries into organizations of this nature or regimes of this nature is concerned, what it does is that it's essentially trying to, create quota, whereby every part of every continent is represented, at least on that level. The same can be said of the United Nations. So Nigeria trying to vert to the Security Council of the United Nations today will, first of all, symbolize that Nigeria has a seat around the Security Council of the United Nations, but the representation goes beyond just the country to the continent, where the country doesn't become too selfish.
Okay, all right now. So one of the things that they keep coming up in this conversation is, as we've earlier on the program a few weeks back, we talked about it, key issue is debt restructuring. That's one of the 15-plus African countries face high debt distress. Most want a fairer global debt architecture. They've been asking for that. Of course, the climate financing and all that, we are bearing the brunt of the wastages down. Trade equity, digital inclusion, reform of the Bretton Woods institution. Now, yesterday on the Business Daily program, one the guest said he believes, especially for Nigeria, and quoted that most organizations that have listened to the Bretton Woods institutions have not fared very well. First, do you agree with that, and do you think we should keep pandering to them as a continent?
Well, you see, this takes me back to what I said earlier about the international rule-based system or order, which has been in place and which effectively is still in place. And part of the reason why we lost Muammar Gaddafi was because he was somebody who was trying to do things unconventionally and move away from the dominance of the petrodollar, which is essentially the international oligarchic currency for exchange. And so you find that people who have gone the path of Gaddafi have almost also faced the same fate. And this is exactly what we're witnessing now with the tariff being slapped on people here and there. So the truth of the matter is we live in a rule-based system or in an order where certain things are deterministic, and the determinants of those things are people in that part of the world, right? And so you must deal with them, because within the international system, you cannot live in isolation. However, I think it is much more critical that we begin to understand that until and unless we begin to find homegrown solutions, until and unless we come back as a people within the African continent and understand our trajectory. Because the truth of the matter is the United States got independence when?
Over 200 years ago.
Now, here we are. We should be looking at people who are close to us, or perhaps our elder brothers. The United States is your great-parent, for crying out loud. Engage with Brazil, engage with the UAE, engage with Singapore, engage with China, right? So this is where the conversation should be, and this is where we need to begin to look to find solutions for our own failings and our own economic, political, and social issues. Until and unless we have that rethink around this conversation, going to the West, constantly trying to bend over backwards, go cap in hand begging, will not solve our problems. There is nowhere power is given. There is nowhere resources are distributed equitably, globally or domestically. So therefore, we must understand that the West is going to continue to be the West because they want to continue to dominate global affairs. Requesting for debt restructuring, etc., is something that I think we should do. However, I don't see that happening. It's not going to happen. We can begin to request for a more nuanced and a more balanced debt sheet so that we can have a conversation around the actual debt we owe, pay as much as we can, and then focus on the things that we need to do to develop ourselves. But we constantly return back to these people. We receive the loan, and ironically, we throw this money into wastages and things like that. Recurrent spending, nothing goes to capital projects. How on earth do you think you're going to move away from the quagmire that you're in? That's where the impossibility comes.
All right, when we return from this short break, the conversation continues. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Africa Update here on Trust TV. Now, still in the studio with me is Professor Mukhtar Imam. We'll be talking about the G20 Summit, ahead of it, and Africa's role actually in political, global and world politics. Now, I'm going to go to listing out a few things. I'm going to have about 5 major big countries in the African continent. Of course, Nigeria being being number one on that list. The top 3 key demands and focus areas that we're expecting at the summit. So for Nigeria, it's a debt restructuring and access to low-cost finance, to industrialization and value chain inclusion, agricultural financing, and food security. For South Africa, it's reform of global financial architecture. Well, back to everybody has that. Cost of capital reduction for developing nations, climate transition financing. For Egypt, it's climate finance and renewable energy investment, debt relief and IMF-linked support, strengthen trade routes via Suez and the AfTA. For Kenya, digital economy inclusion, access to concessional finance for startups and SME, agricultural resilience and climate adaptation. And for Ghana, post-debt restructuring support, investment in green minerals, lithium, gold, inflation and debt management partnerships. These 5 economies, it covers at least the North, the East, the South, and the West. We have 2 Western countries there for Nigeria and Ghana, but South Africa is there, Kenya is there for East, and Egypt is for the North Africa. So let's say holistically covers, make minor Central Africa, but the major part of the continent. Right. Are these things, we can say that finance is very important. Most of these countries I mentioned have finance on the table. These other things they've mentioned, are they things that we should go looking for at this summit? Do you think we should come as one together, whether South Africa is the one that has the seat or not, and project a particular thing? And what do you think that thing is that Africa should push for right now?
Recall earlier I talked about posturing. Posturing is key as far as politics is concerned, whether local or international. The way you're perceived by your opponent or by your whatever the other country you're talking to is the way you will be treated. This is what posturing does. And so Africa, again, just take us a step back. In the last 50 years, do you recall when we have never asked or not asked for debt restructuring or debt relief or something? This is what we've been asking for in the last half a century, and we're still requesting for the same thing, and it is never going to come because this is a capitalist-driven economy, or rather economies. These are capitalist-driven economies, and these are people who understand that the only way that they can dictate to you is by having something on you. And virtually the only thing they feel they have on us right now is debt. Without that, they know they will have to walk away. And so we constantly return back to plead and beg for debt restructuring, it's not, these are just choices of nomenclature. It's the same thing. We're pleading for debt relief. I don't think that's ever going to come. What I do think is that, to answer what you said about what we should be requesting for, is that we should have a realistic conversation around what we owe and begin to harness resources and find the way of getting ourselves out of the quagmire that we're in. As far as concessionary loans are concerned, they know, the leaders know, that the only place you're going to get concessionary loans right now is to look eastward. If you don't look to China, if you don't look to Malaysia, to look to Singapore, look to the UAE or Doha, you're not getting concessionary loans. These things that come from IMF and the World Bank, they know how they come, they know how they're projected. The monies do not come to you. Monies leave Washington to San Francisco to their companies in New York, and they tell you consultants these are the technicalities that comes into these things. So at the end of the day, what you get is just crumbs from the table. They tell you we're giving you machineries, we're giving you etc. etc. And then M&E is sent, so...
Okay. Like, let's go back a bit, like 2 sentences.
Right.
If I understand what you're saying clearly, if money is released from Washington,
Nobody gives you 100% money monetized.
Okay.
Particularly from Washington. You don't get that.
So if we're asking you for 100 million and you agree to give us 100 million, can you actually explain what happens? And,
yeah.
Okay.
You're going to have to come with a Gantt chart. You're going to have to give them your workflow, the entire workflow sheet, and tell them what you request the 100 million or 100 naira for, and then they're going to give you the machines that you are required to do the work with. They're going to give you the expertise. First of all, before we get to that, the consultants will have to sit and understand the project. You're paying the consultants out of the money that you're getting. Now, when the money comes to you, you get machines, equipment, you get personnel who will come to run monitoring and evaluation. You're paying them from that money. All of these things are embedded in the debt you're taking.
Okay, so you're giving me money and you're giving me people that I'm going to pay money from out of the money you're giving me.
Everything is embedded in that money. Everything is embedded in that money. And at the end of the day,
expected to pay that money with interest.
Plus interest. And at the end of the day, what we have seen over the years, read the works of John Perkins, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. This is a lived experience that the man is talking about. He's recounting a lived experience. And you will understand how global, international, particularly economic politics plays out. So the point I'm making, because of time, is in the fact that we're not getting debt relief, we're not getting debt restructuring. It's high time we wake up to the realization that that's never going to happen. It's high time we also come to the realization that we're not getting concessionary loans. As far as the other issues are concerned, how can we be talking about enhancing agriculture? Nigeria can feed the world. And here we are requesting from people outside to give us something to enhance agriculture. And as far as climate change is concerned, you see, the imbalance is going to continue. South Africa and other countries that are suffering from this, African countries, and those along the corridor of the Silk Road, must understand, Bangladesh, for example, that nobody is coming to their aid. Pakistan, for example, nobody is giving them these resources. First of all, Trump doesn't even believe in what they're talking about. Second of all, Trump is beginning to cut back on all of the funding that goes to any international organization or donor agency, let alone something he doesn't agree with, climate change. He thinks it's a hoax. He has said it severally, and that man is going to be in office for a while. And you expect that the G20, with the EU queuing behind Trump, begging for crumbs, will come to you and give you debt restructuring and give you finances. The United Nations cannot do anything about it. That money is not coming anywhere. So it's high time leaders wake up to the realization that you need to harness your resources, put them into places that will have effect on your people. We need to stop this mentality of self-aggrandizement, because this is what is killing us. The resources we're talking about, debt restructuring, whatever, resources come back to people in position of authority, they pocket them. Even the one that is given to carry out projects are not executed. The widening gap in wealth distribution, there's so much gap in income inequality, and you expect people to just queue up behind you. African leaders need to wake up to the fact that until and unless we grow ourselves, the people are your biggest investment. And if you don't invest in them and harness the resources around them, things are never going to change. We will continue to be in circles, unfortunately.
Okay, our time is fast spent, and this conversation seems to like we need to have more time, but we need to actually go. So, in 1 minute, what are your expectations of Africa at this summit?
I am hoping that they're able to hold a gun and have a conversation where the bargain tilts towards, bettering the life of Africans, at least, if not for anything, for the optics. Tell these people, meet them like a king meeting a king. That's what I would say, because we need to. Posturing is important.
Yes. Basically, back to what you're talking about, posturing. We going there, not cap in hand, speaking. The theme actually for this year's thing is solidarity, sustainability. Hopefully, they will be able to carry through with that theme and show it at the table when they meet. That's it for Africa Update this week. We've been talking with Professor Mukhtar Imam. He is an international relations and diplomacy expert and the professor of international relations and diplomacy at the National Security Studies.
National Institute for Security
National
Studies.
Institute for Security Studies. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Mine.
Thank you for your time, as always. Come to share your insights. We tend to learn much more than even we were going for on the program. Thank you so much for joining us on the program this week. Thank you to our viewers out there for joining us on Africa Update this week. For more of our programs, news and documentaries, do well to follow us on social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. Being your host today, Chiamaka Nwafor, same time, same place next week. Bye for now.